Yeah, Cindy with the Soil Health Coalition asked myself and Ruth to speak on soil health gardening. So, um, as part of the duties with my job, I work a lot with just about anyone that does any type of production within the state. So, yes, I work primarily with our traditional row crop and livestock producers. That's a bulk of my job. But I also work a lot with kind of the other category. And so, sometimes they're called specialty crop producers, or sometimes they're called garden groups or master gardeners groups. Basically, anyone that doesn't grow corn, soybeans, wheat, or beef, we kind of lump into the other category, right, in the state. And so, I kind of like working with some of those groups. I often find that especially master gardeners groups are a lot more in touch with what's going on with their soil than some of our producers that have 20,000 acres of land. And I think a lot of that is because they work with their hands right in the soil. And they're very in tune with a lot of different production and growth methods. So yes, that's my interest. I guess you could say I've been a gardener since I was probably about knee high. And so I'm going to give you a little bit, it's kind of my soapbox on the word garden. I think sometimes we throw gardening, especially nowadays, into this, so it's kind of this cute little hobby thing you do like in 5 planters in a 10 by 10 area. But it wasn't that long ago when most of our fruit and vegetable production for family use was all kind of grown on the farm, right? And I can say not that long ago because that was my grandparents when I was growing up. So I would spend a lot of summers at my grandparents or my uncle in southwestern Minnesota on a dairy farm. And before I was old enough to drive tractor and kind of actually be, a farm hand for grandpa or uncle, I would spend most of the day with grandma in their 1 to 1.5 acre size garden. Okay, now if you are familiar with gardening or you do any on your own, you know that 1 acre or 1.5 acre garden is a lot of work, right? And so I often credit my aunts and my grandmothers with kind of giving me my first passion for soil health. Because you know how you're growing up, you don't really understand. Sometimes grandparents, they snip at each other or bicker a little bit. It's all loving, but my grandma would say, "Grandpa earns the money, I feed the family." And she'd tell that to a little grandson, and I would never really know what it meant, but I eventually figured it out. So that's my bit on gardening. I think there should be another word for it because I think it can be more than a hobby, and it's very management intensive if you're doing a proper job. So, okay, let's get started with this. And what I've got for you today is just really a bunch of pictures of the way that I garden, the way that I produce. And so I work in an area, like Austin said, we started a community garden behind my community church in Huron. And we had a lot of acres. We have a big building on a lot of acres. And it was basically just being mowed. And so when I first moved to Huron, like I said, "What are you guys doing with all this?" And "Oh, we just mow it." I'm like, well, okay, let's find something else to do with it. So I've got a garden area that I operate with myself and my 3 kids. It's just over a 1/4 acre in size. And then there are other plots that are 20 by 20 or 20 by 40 that people can, in the community, can have for free. And so that's a little bit about what you're going to see some pictures of here. Okay, so I wouldn't be a good NRCS employee if I didn't tell you to check your soils, check your soils, check your soils before you pick a spot or do anything when you're producing. So let's just an example or a map of this little screenshot aerial photo, and this is what it looked like. You can go on to Web Soil Survey. You can go on there, you can draw a boundary around your field, hit the soils button, it'll tell you your soils. And then it has all sorts of information that you can find on there, really more than you would probably ever want to know on your soil and your soil type. But this is a good place to start. If nothing else, it'll tell you if you have a loam soil, a sand soil, or a clay soil. So if you don't know a lot about soils, it just kind of gives you that base management so you know what you're starting out with. Okay, and I also wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't tell you the 5 soil health principles. So I'm going to assume a lot of you know it already, but I'm just going to go through the 5 anyways. And what I do is I break them down into two categories. The first category are the keep the soil covered and minimize soil disturbance. So that's kind of the no-till portion of our soil health principles. And I've got those as basically that's the protection part of our soil health plan. So if you have your soil covered and you're not disturbing it, that's how we essentially stop erosion. The whole mission of NRCS, why NRCS was formed, was to stop erosion. And so that's kind of the first things you need to implement. Keep the soil covered, disturb it as little as possible. The next three principles are how we start building our soils and how we start recovering really productive soils and making your soils work for you. And so that's plant diversity. And plant diversity, in my opinion, is pretty easy to implement in a garden setting. You're planting a lot of different types of plants. And so if you're rotating around, you can meet that plant diversity part really quite easily. The next part is a continual living root. This is where you have to start being a little more creative in your gardening techniques, and I'm going to cover some of that. But living roots you want to keep in there, that's what keeps our soils fed. The longer you can have a living root in there, the better you are. So that means basically April through October in South Dakota, you want to try and keep a living root in there. And the last one, which in a gardening setting, depending on your municipality, this could be your most difficult one, integrating livestock. So in Huron, before I was told to stop, I basically had chickens running around in my garden. And then the city told me I couldn't do that. So I do not have livestock, chickens or poultry running around my garden, but I do bring in compost that has a lot of animal manure in it. So that's my way of integrating livestock. Okay. So this, yeah, sure.
Could you run rabbits?
I can't keep the rabbits away. So yes, I got,
You what?
I've got wild rabbits, plenty. No, so in Huron, basically you cannot have anything that, they've got a whole list of things you can't have. Basically you can have dogs and cats. So that's the extent of it. So this is what my garden, I'm kind of gonna go through a sequence of a typical year. And so this is what a portion of my garden looks like in the spring. So most gardeners, my mother until a few years ago would be mortified as if this is what their garden looked like starting out in the spring. But to me, this is a beautiful sight. So this is the remnants of my cover crop area of the garden. A full 1/4 of my garden is planted to a full season cover every single year. So no vegetable fruit production takes place. It's just a full season multi-species cover crop mix. And it's really quite a beautiful mess. So this is what it looks like in the spring. And just kind of keep that in your mind's eye. Okay, this is what other portions of the garden look like. Notice that the ground is pretty much 100% covered.
Did you remove any of that residue from last year?
Nope, you're going to see what I do with it here in a second. Yep. So this is where, this is rows like where I had tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, that type of thing. Okay, so remember that was my cover crop area. And what do you notice is the difference between this photo and the previous one? I did. So we've got a big batwing mower. Remember I said we got all that grass to mow? Take a big batwing mower and I set the deck as high as I can the first pass around, and I just turn the blades off and I just mow it all down, or I just knock it all down. Then the second time around I turn the blades back on, I turn the blades on and we chop it, and then I'll lower them half down again and I'll chop it again. So I end up with about this much mulch on 1/4 of the garden area. And so then that's typically where I will plant our squash and melons, that type of thing. And that's my cover right there. I just plant right into it. I typically don't plant those till later in the year so I can avoid some pest issues. Yeah, that's where I plant my squash, melons, that type of thing. Okay, this is my sweet corn area. And so you'll notice if you can't see in the back, that is not soil. That is actually, anyone recognize what's on the ground there? Tree fabric, right. And so true to form, that fabric does not break down. The fabric you're looking at there is probably 10, 12 years old, and we just reuse it. And so what we do is, I've got it in strips that match pretty evenly for 1/4 of our garden area. And it's put down with just the same staples they use when they're doing with trees. So the staples are the only thing I regularly have to buy because those eventually will rust out. But those staples will even last a couple of years. We can reuse those 2 or 3 years in a row. So what we'll do with this area is, see if I got it on the next slide here. Okay, that's what a hole looks like right there. The first year was really kind of a pain in the butt because you've got all this fabric and you got to have a way to plant the seed and for the seed to go through something. And so I thought the easiest way would be just to take a box cutter, and so that's what we did. And it took a long time and it was a pain in the butt. And then I met a producer here a year or two ago, and I was out on his place, and he was a larger scale. He's producing vegetables to sell. And I said, man, how did you get those holes so nice and round? They look perfectly. Well, he just used a little flame torch, just like that. And he said, yeah, it went really smooth. And he said he made the same mistake I did when he first did it. And the next time around, he burned holes in them. So that went pretty quick. And it actually seals those little strips so they don't fray as much. Yeah, I got 2 questions.
You lay drip line underneath there as well?
Yes, there is drip line, and I'll get to that. Yep. Pretty much all if I ever water, it's all through drip line. Yeah.
I used a can, like a coffee can, heated up and
Yep. Yep. Yeah, there's coffee can method.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Yep, go ahead and repeat it.
coffee can, you heat that up and then you set it on the fabric and it melts it.
Yep. So that's, and my sweet corn does really well in this system. It really likes it.
That first year, how did you prep your land?
So this was all, it was all just old grass hay field. Really, they'd just been mowing it for the previous 5, 6, 7 years. And so basically I just burnt it all down with Roundup. That was my first kill. So I didn't really have time because I wanted to be producing the first year. Otherwise I probably would have just rolled all this fabric out over and just killed it through shade. But that'd be another method. No, I just burnt it all down with, oh, sorry.
Do you pick up the fabric every?
Yep, and so we're gonna get to that here in a second. So there's my labor force, if you can see. There's my son, he is 10. Next daughter is 12, and oldest daughter is 14. And so they are my labor force. When they were really young, they weren't quite as productive, but they were really excited. Now they're a little more productive, but not as excited. So, but really, this form of gardening, once you get your system set up, it's almost, we do just about all the work here. We do all the prep one morning, and then we can go out the next morning and get most everything planted, depending on timing. And then it's basically just watch everything grow until harvest time. It's really kind of lazy, if you think about it. So, yeah, so this is then they're cutting down the corn stalks, we pile them, and then basically once we get other stuff planted, we'll just spread those corn stalks out to lay on the ground for ground cover. And then yes, we take that fabric, we pull the staples, and then one person on either end just pulling it tight, and we just walk it over to the next spot, staple, 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 staple. So, okay, I got to talk quick here. So I'm just going to go through sequence. So basically the last picture you saw would be like early May, and this is around Memorial Day, so late May, early June. You can see my cover crop mix growing right here, and I just broadcast that and cover it with a real fine layer of compost. Okay, there's my corn after it had been half of it taken out by hail and a windstorm, so we replanted. But that's basically what it looks like early on. You do need to make sure you either use a lot of staples, or like we do, we've got some steel rod that are holding the fabric down, because until that corn gets up to knock the wind down, it can flap a lot and kill your corn. Okay, this is, like I said, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, that type of thing. And what I do is I use this is a compostable, it's a fabric, I think it's made out of soybean oil, if I remember quite right. It basically just acts like plastic, but it only lasts a season, and even at the end of the season it's in pretty rough shape, which is fine because it just degrades. And then in between rows I do annual ryegrass and a crimson clover, and that's my weed control. Basically I'll just I just broadcast that early in the spring. It comes with the good spring rains usually, and it germinates on its own and grows. And then I'll usually mow that every other week or something like that. And then I'll mow it every other week until middle of August, and at the end of August I just let it grow. And it creates a pretty nice cover there. So I'm just going to go through a sequence. You'll see things growing. And I've got really quite sandy soils there. It's a shoe soil, which is technically a sandy wetland soil, but I rarely have to water. This is the first year I used really any extensive amount of watering on my tomatoes. They usually root down really well into there, tap into water. Does anyone know what this caterpillar is?
The horn tomato something.
Good guess. Good guess, but no. That's actually what most people guess.
Looks like it's got that little.
Yep. It's actually, you know, the sphinx moths.
Yeah, the big moth.
Yep, the humming. Yep, that's what it is. And you know what their primary food is? It's eating it right there. Purslane. Yep. So yeah, purslane. So I've got weeds in my garden, not very bad, but I do have weeds, but I don't really pull them very often. Usually because they're outcompeted by most of my cover crop and my ground cover. And I've also got lots of garden snakes, which my wife hates, and that's why she does not help very much. But garden snakes eat most of my pests. So there's the sweet corn.
Garden snake, what kind of garden snake?
Yeah, just gardeners. Yep. Yep.
How far apart is your corn?
So the corn rows are about 2 feet, and then the spacing is whatever it happened to be when we were cutting. So it's not super high density. I'll usually plant varieties, and you can see right here on this plant here, see it's got the main stalk, and then it's got a couple of offshoots there. So I'll usually plant varieties that are good at that if you give them the space, and I'll get 2 good ears on the main stalk, and then I'll usually get some peripheral ears on the auxiliary stalks. So I'll get a really good harvest the first time around, and then usually a week or so later, those other ones will come, and they're not as big of ears, but it's still production. So. There's kind of just my squash area, melon area. This is further on in the year. I've got lots of flowers. That's just my son picking there. Okay, there's just some harvest. Those are my helpers. One other final note, I've got my whole perimeter of my garden area. I've got elderberries on one side. I've got plums on another side. I've got Hanson hedgerows on another side, and then I've got Aronio berry on the other side. So I've got all 4 sides of my garden have the lower growing shrubs, and that does like multiple things. They all flower, so really it's quite intoxicating being in our garden at certain points of the year because it's such a strong smell. So it also encourages pollinators, and it also protects from those windstorms that we have come through. Not full 100% protection, but it'll knock down that wind just enough to maybe save your plants. So with that, also keep in mind, and maybe this is for next year, native plants in the landscape. This is my yard. It is much cheaper and easier to do this than to keep your Kentucky bluegrass green and fertilized and watered all year. So.
My husband is Dwayne, and yeah, he's a huge advocate for no-till and has been, and so we've never done anything any other way in our house. It's always been a no-till garden. We've been doing it for 30 years. You know, we've changed homes over those years, and kind of our style has changed and evolved, and really still evolve. So every year, somebody said you learn something new every year, and every year, you know, something is different, and we have to do something different. And so, but it's always interesting and fun. Just a little background there. We do in here, you know, if you're not familiar with here, our backyard is a south-facing hillside, so we get a lot of sun, get a lot of heat early, and we do have sandy soils as well. I didn't do something that I can't do it, but. So this is I just kind of wanted to go through the garden design and how we set our garden up. So we have quite a large yard, so we're very fortunate that way. We have different areas that we can put our garden in, but our main garden area, we grow peppers and tomatoes. We usually have some squash in there. And last year, so 2021, we use half of our garden, we plant to our vegetables, and then really the other half is a full cover crop. Okay, so we have enough room, we can do that, yeah.
Before I try to draw all of this stuff out, is there a way for us to have access to the slides?
We're recording.
Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
That's fine,
See
yeah.
me afterwards.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody?
Cover crop, what cover crop?
Okay, so I'm gonna go through that as we talk, and I just wanted to show you how we set that up. We really love tomatoes at our house, and we really believe that with tomatoes, you gotta have a 4-year rotation. Okay, so rotation is really important, especially when you're no-tilling, okay? So in 2022, what we'll do is on this is the west side of our garden. we'll plant that down to covers. And then in this side of the garden, that's where our tomatoes, our peppers, our squash, and our carrots will be this coming summer. And then just 2023, we'll revert that back. The difference in 2023 will be, whereas in 2021 our peppers were here on the south side and the tomatoes were on the north. In 2023 our tomatoes will be here and our peppers will be down here. We sprinkle our squash kind of around the edges and stuff like that, so that's kind of how that works. So we just really, like, again, rotation is very important, I think, when you're no-tilling. So here's our cover crop. This actually was taken May 26, 2019, before we planted this. And I had this picture because in 2019, that was the biggest cover crop we ever had. And we had a lot of rain that spring. If you remember 2019, I was thinking, oh boy, we're not going to get a garden planted this year with that cover crop. But we got it done. So our cover crop, this is like the spring, like I said, that's not the full season cover crop. That's a cover crop. Some of it overwintered from the previous year when we had a full season cover crop. Maybe there was some winter weeds and triticale, but my husband Dwayne, and I should say that, you know, we really garden together. It's a joint effort. Dwayne's going to be here tomorrow. I'm going home tonight, but if you've got questions and I'm not around, he does as much in the garden, if not more than I do. So he's big. He's our cover crop planner. You know, has access to a lot of those seeds from the farm, so that does make it easier for him. But he'll go back in this spring where we're going to plant our vegetables, and he'll put in. It'll be primarily grasses. So there'll be some maybe fall triticale from last year, maybe some winter weed in there. Most of the annuals that were there, broadleaf annuals, will be dead. He won't replant any of that. This spring he'll go back. He'll augment that if there's thin areas to like oats and barley, things like that. Because when you think of your garden, it's all broadleaves primarily. I mean, you've got corn there too. We don't grow corn in our yard because we do that out in the farm. So we don't want to have broadleaves in that cover crop because we think they're going to carry disease to our tomatoes or our peppers. White mold is a very complicated disease. Peas, lentils, a lot of those, flax, a lot of those broadleaf annual crops that you see in a cover crop, the species that you see in a cover crop will carry white mold, and it will also impact your tomatoes, so it can carry through to your tomatoes. So just to say, we're very heavy on grass, full season grasses in our cover crop. So just a little bit of a closer look, you can see there is some brassica, there's some lentils in there, there's a few peas, but primarily full season grasses is what we've got growing early in the season and late in the fall. We do it for a couple reasons, to cycle those diseases out, but also those full season grasses will pick up a lot of nitrogen. It'll sequester that nitrogen, and we think it releases it later for our vegetable crops. So that's our goal there. Here was our cover crop this year. So we went in, we planted May 18th. This is the day we planted. So again, it was, every year seems to get bigger, but it was a pretty good sized cover crop. And but primarily cool season grasses, like that'll be barley, oats, and some winter wheat or fall triticale. And what we do here now is we just go in and we dig that hole. We use a shovel, we dig a hole, we put our transplant, our peppers, and our tomatoes right into that cover crop. We do nothing else. And we usually we have these bottomless pails or tomato cages, we'll put those right on there. And that's just so we can find them, right? Because it's hard. And then literally that cover crop is usually at a stage where the head is started to go reproductive, so the head might be in the stalk somewhere. You walk around on that cover crop, and before you know it, that's what you've got. So this was taken this year, June 4th. A couple weeks later, you walk around, it bends that main stem over, and that's not going to really come back, okay? This picture I took because I was showing some people what I was doing. And, if you guys remember this summer, we got some super hot days in June, and so I went in there. It's really hard on those little plants. I did some shade things, but that's not what the picture was about. I really wanted you guys to see what happens to that cover crop when you start walking on it. Here's our July 5th. That's what our garden looked like. It didn't grow super well early this year because we got really hot early, but we did have a lot of produce at the end of the year, so you can see that's how it looked. We usually don't get deer in our backyard, but I think they were hungry this year, and they weren't eating my tomatoes. They were getting in there and eating my zucchini, so we just strung some string around there, and that kind of kept them out. Okay, this is July 5th again. This is the area that's been a cover crop. Okay, so it was vegetables in 2020. It was cover. Dwayne would put in some cover crop in the late fall of 2020 into right underneath that those vegetables like Kent talked about. He'll broadcast some different species in there, and then some of those things will overwinter. But he'll augment that with some cool season grass type stuff in the spring of the full season cover crop. But by the time you get to July 5th, a lot of that stuff has ripened off. It likes the cool weather, so it's starting to ripen off. So what he does is he doesn't like to see anything head out in cover crops. So we just use a weed whacker. We go through and he'll whack some of those heads off. They start to set heads. But he's probably used a weed whacker or even mowed that down here. He seeded a cover crop before he did that, so the cover crop will be broadcast in there. He goes in, he just mows out that cover crop or weed whacks it or whatever, and it's kind of getting ripe anyways. It doesn't like the weather anymore. And then again, we sprinkle some of our compost over that, just like Kent said he did. That cover crop that he seeds in July will primarily be warm season grasses now. So he'll come home with some millet. This year we had pearl millet, we had foxtail millet in there. You might see some of those broadleaf species come back or in there, but not very much, okay?
What kind of, no, never mind.
Okay, so because the millets really like that hot weather, so they're gonna do well during this hot weather. So here's our millet. This is October 15th. Again, Dwayne's out there weed whacking. So he takes the heads. He doesn't like to see things head out, so he'll take those heads off of there if they start to develop. And what he also says is when you do that, it stimulates tiller growth on that millet, so it'll start setting some tillers, and that'll give you more growth. And I noticed that Danny mentioned in his first presentation how that also can extend the root system. So that gives you that root system too that builds your soils, okay? So that's how this is how we're doing it. I think everybody's different. I just went in and took some pictures close-ups of that. So this is just 3 of that cover crop. It's a little flax plants, not too many of those, but you can see the foxtail millets just lying down there and the other millets. So, and this is October 30th. So this would be not sure what happened there, but anyways, this is in where we've been growing our vegetables this year. So in 2021, this is the area we had our tomatoes and peppers, and this is where he planted the cover crop. It was probably a little bit before October 30th, maybe. He went in and he broadcast that underneath that canopy. He tries to get that going early, okay? And this was a nice long fall. Some years we might have to do that earlier. So, you're just kind of playing it by ear. But those cool season grasses, oats, they love that cool weather. They'll just come on there late in the fall. They think they're just in heaven with that cool weather. They don't like the heat, so they'll grow. And so just kind of last, just to show you, one of the tools that we use in our yard, and we use it a lot, is we have a mower with a bag on the back. So we bag all our grass clippings, we use mulch everywhere. Okay, that helps keep our soils cool, it keeps the moisture from evaporating off, it holds that, if you're from the Pierre area, it gets hot and we need that. So here what happens is, I guess I lost a picture on that. So anyways, just to show you that somehow or other something happened to this picture that was on this side, but 10/30th, and it shows Dwayne just going through our vegetable garden. It's kind of the end of the season. He's taking out the supports that we put up for the tomatoes, pulling that out, harvesting maybe. And then he just kind of, we might clip some of those vines, but we just kind of leave it until we get a good frost and things just dry right down. He runs through that with our mower, which has a mulching blade on it. He'll mulch it, he'll bake some of that. It all goes right back on that garden, okay? So it stays right there. And whoops, oh, sorry. So just to show you, this was a different year, but I just want to kind of show you a close-up of, you could see all those, rotten tomatoes and stuff that just gets left there. And I know people have said, don't you have a real problem with volunteer tomatoes and things like that? Occasionally, but tomatoes aren't really weedy, so you might, I do a lot of hand weeding in my garden, so I get weeds and I pull them out, but most of that stuff, by the time we replant that area, you won't even find it, it's gone. You know, it's just disappeared, so.
You talked about compost. Do you have any animal compost?
We don't put any animal, I don't put
Chicken,
anything
no
meat,
beef,
no, no. I wanted to say, Ken talked about livestock, so the deer are livestock. We do get deer and rabbits in our yard too, but no, we don't use manure in our compost, but I just, you know, I'm kind of a large yard, so I just wanted to say that I do have other areas I plant. So this is an area of carrots, and the thing that I've had the most trouble with when I no-till garden is getting some of those very small seeded vegetable crops to come up through the residue, okay? I struggle getting good lettuce crops, getting good carrots to come up. So what we've done, this is part of our garden, and we just took a little area, we cleared the residue off of there. Okay, we didn't disturb the soil, we cleared the residue off. I took that area that year and I sprinkled my vegetable seed just right on the surface, and I pat it down so it gets that seed to soil coverage. And then we buy a few bags of bagged topsoil, just cheap, $2 at Menards or Walmart or wherever you want to get it. And we just sprinkle that on top of there. So we know that's good soil, it's going on top. I do the same with trenches, so this is just probably, I know I had some Swiss chard and some lettuce, some rosa lettuce. I just take my trowel, you can see it right here, make a little tiny trench in the ground, kind of like a spread, move that residue just a little bit, just like you would with a cedar if you're a farmer. You got those, you know, residue managers or whatever that go through. Take off that residue, I make a little trench, I sprinkle the seed down the trench, I take my hand, I just pat that seed down there, and then I add bagged soil to the top of that. I just fill it in with bagged soil, and it seems to work a little better for me, okay? So I see some of those small seeded stuff just struggles a little bit more in the residue.
So then you don't cover it back up?
I don't, no, just that little area is uncovered, yeah.
Okay.
But around it, it's covered. We are huge on mulch. I mentioned that lawnmower with the bagger on the back. We put grass clippings everywhere, okay? They're just everywhere in our garden. But grass clippings are high in nitrogen and they break down very quickly. So, I mean, we might have that much, and this is what I get at the end of the year. But it's still really convenient for me as a mulch, and so I continue to use it. I like it. I think it adds to the soil, and it definitely protects my soil because, like, again, we get hot. But if you do that, I really encourage you to watch out what herbicides you use on your turf, okay? So we do use a crabgrass preventer, but we rarely use 2,4-D or dicamba on any of our lawn. We might one year have a very, you know, maybe a bad weedy area. We'd go in maybe very late in the fall when we're not using our grass anymore and maybe treat that area. But typically our biggest problem is crabgrass, and I don't know what you do about that. So once it gets to August, we just have crabgrass in here. So, but I do use crabgrass preventer early in the season, and that doesn't seem to hurt anything. So we just, you know, just kind of a couple things. We super enjoy our yard. We have a big yard. We've got like a lot of native flowers too. I've really just gotten into that more the last couple of years. You can see I had two beautiful butterflies in there, and a bird bath. So we get really hot, and now that I'm retired, I try to fill it every day because the birds and the bees and the pollinators, they all use that water. So this is my compost. It's not a big thing, and I have to say that does take some time, and I give Dwayne complete credit. He does it. So, but I really we put a lot of food scraps like vegetable and fruit scraps in there. You can see, and then, you know, maybe like sometimes when you're talking to groups, you know, master gardeners particularly, they like their garden to look real tidy, and so the ladies will ask, well, you leave that residue there all winter or whatever. They don't like that. Well, this is a great way to use your residue. Maybe if you've got an area of your yard that you want to look a little tidier, you don't want that, you know, kind of no-till look to it. But so yeah, just compost like crazy. I stay away from meat because I do think sometimes we get some little rodents in the area, some cats out there sometimes. So, but it worked good, and we use it, and Dwayne turns it, and we add, you know, a lot of stuff to that. So this is an area we have again a funny shaped big yard with some corners to it, and we have a hard time getting water to the grass in those corners. So we seeded that down to warm season grasses. And Wayne went in and put in these crocuses, and so every spring, it's just a really nice to get out there. It's a real sign of spring when we see those crocuses coming up through that warm season grass before it's greened up. So it's kind of a fun thing to do. I had the great, Danny talked about why we do these things, and I had the good fortune, I think, to spend a lot of time in my youth on the shores of Lake Winnipeg. That's what we see every year on the shores this year. Now, it's hard, it's hard to see those things. So we do all this because, we really believe that there's a lot of things we can do to help our area where we live and improve the environment and areas for our children. So that's all I got. Again, I love my flowers too, and that's my contact, my email. I'm a master gardener, so part of our responsibility is we're volunteers and we're happy to answer questions. So that's my email, and you're welcome to email me if you ever have questions about no-till gardening. I'd love to help. So.
Another question.
Yep.
Kent had indicated that he uses annual ryegrass and crimson clover. Is that right?
Yep,